Hi there, Henry from 911virgin, Porsche people in Uxbridge. Welcome to a new video. This came in and we don't get very many 944s. They're quite an old car now and most of them aren't in particularly fantastic condition. So quite rare for us to see one. But this is such a nice car and it was such a great opportunity. I thought we'd make a little video on it. What actually is it? So Porsche had the Porsche 911. And in the 1970s, the 911 was getting, I wouldn't say long in the tooth, but it was of an older generation, and Porsche were thinking, well, where do we go? Where's the future going to lie? In the 70s were flared trousers and psychedelic lights and weird things. So Porsche were kind of thinking about the Porsche 928, which is a water-cooled front-engine car, and that was potentially going to be their future. And at the same time, they were working in conjunction with Audi, because Porsche and Audi are very closely linked. The families are, as I say, back in the day, in the 1940s, Ferdinand Porsche designed, as everyone knows, the Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle. And so there's always been a relationship between Porsche and Volkswagen. And so Porsche were developing a sports car for Volkswagen, and that was what turned out to be the 924. It was based around a Volkswagen engine. Everyone says it's a van engine. It was actually, I think, an Audi 100 engine, 2-litre engine, and Porsche, I think, had the cylinder head design for it that they did. Maybe not, but certainly it was a Audi 100 engine, which may have been in a van, who knows. Anyway, so Porsche developed the Porsche 924, but then VW got a little bit nervous. They thought, well, fuel crisis, whatever. And the appetite for kind of sports cars waned a little bit in the late 70s for them. So Porsche ended up running with the Porsche 924 themselves. And it ran alongside the then 911s. So you would have had the 3-litre SC at the time, and then became the 3.2 Carrera. The Porsche 924 wasn't a car that was ever really going to set the world on fire in terms of performance and handling, and it's quite a heavy car, but it had a Porsche badge on the front, it had pop-up headlights, and my first Porsche was a 924, and Porsche sold a lot of 924s. I think they sold about 150,000 Porsche 924s. So, you know, whilst the true Porsche enthusiasts slated it, the rest of the world said, actually, hey, look, it's a Porsche, it's quite good fun, and so it did very well. In 1982, Porsche launched the 944, which is an evolution of the 924. And they changed the engine. I think Volkswagen, Audi were stopping production of the engine that went in the 924. So Porsche developed their own engine, which was a 2.5-litre engine. And they changed the look of the car. They flared it out quite a lot. So if you look at the front arches and also the rear arches, you know, you've got this really masculine stance. So, you know, they really flare out here and on the back shoulders here. So it gives it a really nice kind of purposeful look as a sports car. So visually, the 944 was a really good looking car when compared to the sort of skinnier Porsche 924. The sort of pluses and minuses, I mean, it's quite a modern layout in that it's a fairly good weight balance, because Porsche have the engine in the front and they have the gearbox in the back. They actually have a thing called a transaxle, so transmission and rear axle combined to transaxle. And so the engine drives the transaxle, I can't even say the word, drives the transaxle through a torque tube, which is an enclosed prop shaft. And it allows for pretty good weight balance. So in that respect, you know, quite a sporty design and works quite well. Porsche, in the evolution of the 944, it started out as a 2.5-litre car. They then changed the base 944 from 2.5 to 2.7. They also introduced 16-valve cylinder head technology to an S, or 16 Ventily, I think they called it, 16-valve. And then in 1989, this bad boy came out. And this is Porsche 944 S2. And the S2 had a 3-litre engine, 16 valve head, and was a pretty interesting engine. Let's have a look at the engine. So this is a 3-litre 944 S2 engine. At the time, it was, I think I'm right in saying, the largest capacity 4-cylinder engine that was in mainstream production. And it's got a few features because of that. So it's a 16 valve cylinder head, so you have 4 valves per cylinder, 2 exhaust valves, 2 inlet valves. The 2 camshafts are in the top here, but only the exhaust camshaft is driven off the crankshaft. So the exhaust camshaft is driven off the crankshaft in the normal way with a cam belt, and you can see that just here. So this is driving the exhaust camshaft. The inlet camshaft is actually driven by a little chain linking the 2 camshafts with a tensioner on a plastic slipper which sort of tensions the chain there. One of the things you've got to watch out for is over a period of time these can wear, these little slippers, and you can have that failing, and if that fails, that's pretty bad, because it's the same as a cam belt going, in that if this camshaft stops turning, it means that the inlet valves would get pushed into the top of the piston crowns. Bad day in the office. You also, as well as the camshafts being driven, have things called balance shafts, and you have 2 balance shafts in this engine. And the balance shafts are essentially off-centre weights, a little bit like camshafts, but they're designed to work in conjunction with each other, and if you had one going on its own, it would shake the engine, but the 2 combined work together. And the theory behind it is, what actually happens, with the balance shafts turning round, they're working against each other, counters any vibration that you might get in what is a large capacity 4-cylinder engine. If you go and do your homework and go on Google, you'll find that most 3-litre engines would be either V8s, they might be V6s, but they certainly wouldn't be, generally speaking, 4-cylinder engines. So the balance shafts help smooth the 4-cylinder engine out, and they make it feel more like a kind of inline 6-cylinder engine rather than a 4-cylinder engine. One or two other bits and pieces in here. You have a little reservoir for your power steering in here. You've got a coolant reservoir. You've got brake master cylinder and servo there. Engine oil goes in there, a little dipstick in there. This is the inlet manifold. You've got a airflow meter just in here. And you've also got a little motor here and a link bar across, because the Porsche 944 S2 has pop-up headlights, and pop-up headlights are brilliant. As I said when we did, I think it was the flat-nose turbo, which also had pop-up headlights. The thrill of pop-up headlights, it just, I don't know, it sets like the child in you. It certainly does for me anyway, so I think they're brilliant. The 944 S2 came with these Design 90 wheels, and we later saw those on the 964 model 911 as well, but these wheels here. And the front end of the car, when prior to the S2, the front bumper was sort of a separate part to the rest of the car, and this used what was then the 944 turbo front end, just to make it a little bit neater, so a cleaner lined front end. And you also had at the rear here this rather nice little under spoiler, just you can see it going there. There was a little piece to the left of the exhaust, then a longer piece which ran down there, and that was again, at the time, it was really quite a funky thing, like sort of under spoiler was really cool. This particular car, because it's a later car, it's got the bridge spoiler on here as well. So this sort of little raised spoiler, aileron, call it what you will. Quite a practical car. It was a hatchback, kind of in the 80s. Hatchbacks, flavour of the day. I don't know when they were invented. Was it 70s, 80s, whenever it was. They were a sort of new invention. Prior to that, you had shooting brakes, which some of you may call estate cars, but the hatchback sort of came into being. And so quite a practical car. You have folding seats. This particular late car has split folding seats, so they go down on either side. But it means that you can actually, you know, put a bit of gear in the back there, which is kind of quite handy. So, you know, you've got a decent space in there. If you play the sport, you get your golf sticks in there quite easily and whatever else you'd put in the back of a car. And yeah, so very practical car. So when the 924 was launched, and with the early 944s, you had I think it was a four pod sort of binnacle. Your dashboard here was individual pods. In 1986, they launched what's called the oval dash interior, which was for the 944, and it gave this cleaner line sort of piece of plastic there with the gauges flat behind it, and that also gave you power steering automatically on the 944 as well. Obviously, that then remained through, as you can see, to the S2. This is 1991 car, I think, this one. 5-speed manual gearbox in this car. Quite a sort of nice gear shifting on it. We'll take it out for a drive and see, you know, what it feels like. But you know, quite a sort of modern interior. Certainly compared to the 911 of the day, you know, this felt a much more modern interior when compared to what at the time would have been a 3.2 Carrera, which was kind of still quite chaotic. You know, you had all your switches were to hand. You had a sort of line of switches there to change the mirror, to do the rear wiper and so on, central locking and so on. And the other feature on this car, most of them had it, was the lift-out sunroof. Now, it's quite a faff, as we're about to find, to take the sunroof out completely, but you had a couple of things you could do as you're driving along. So let me demonstrate the sunroof to you. So the 944 sunroof, how does it all work? So with the ignition on, you can, as you're driving along, press a button and the sunroof tilts open and it allows air to flow through the car. Particularly if you lower the windows down a bit, you get a bit of air flowing through. You can also lift the sunroof out, and there's a knack and an art to doing it, and so I shall impart to you the vital information of how the sunroof works. So first of all, if we put the sunroof back down again, now if we turn the ignition all the way off and turn it back just to the first click, so not the accessory position but the first click, and if we go to put the sunroof up, you can hear the pins, they've actually retracted back, so there's nothing holding the sunroof in now. You need to release 2 clips on there. If you pop out M's, little button there to release the hatchback, as you can see I cunningly did. You can now lift this out. You have to be a little bit careful because it's quite heavy, but that lifts out as a panel and stores in the rear, like so. And then you have a kind of open top sunroof. You've got a little wind disruptor, which with that down, you can sometimes get a bit of booming in the car, and that was designed to help reduce the booming. They still can be a little bit boomy and so on, but it allowed you to have a big, wide, open sunroof, because of course there's nowhere for a sunroof to slide, given that you've only got that much space there. So that is the 944 sunroof. So to refit the sunroof, again, it's slightly ungainly, but you need to take this out. You've got to locate it in the wind disruptor, and it is a bit of an art to getting it in. There we go, that's in, and let that fall down. Now, two things you've got to do. Pop back inside the car, Ems. The first thing you've got to do, redo those two clips, and then with the ignition key still in the first position, not the accessory position, you go as though you're going to put the roof down, and that relocates the pins into the sunroof. And you can now check it by turning the ignition on and ask it to go up, and the sunroof goes up and it comes down again, and that's refitting the sunroof. Performance wise, it's about, I think it's 211 horsepower, 0 to 60, I think a fraction under 7 seconds, and top speed around about 150 miles an hour. I think it might actually be 149 in the manual, but give or take 150 miles an hour, which is an ideal opportunity to take it out for a drive and see how it drives. As I said earlier, we don't get that many 944s in. You know, most of the ones we see aren't really worth buying. There's plenty sold back in the day, but as they, obviously the passing of time, as I say, they're kind of, whereas a 911, its intrinsic value was always kind of £10,000 minimum at all stages in its life, so it's worth spending a bit of money on it. The 944 went through a period where its value dipped down, so you know they became probably a bit less loved. What's slightly worrying about this particular car is even a late 944 S2 like this one is now, well, 31 years old. The early ones when they came out, and I still remember them when they were a current car. I was buying and selling cars when these were a current car, so it would lead me to think that I'm getting old, which is a bit worrying. It's a very sort of familiar cabin space. The oval dash, as they came out in '86, very familiar dashboard, and just sitting in this to take it out for a drive, it's kind of bringing back all the old memories. When you go to start the car, it's a slightly laboured start on these cars. The starter motor, it almost feels like the battery is slightly low. It's not, it's just they sort of slightly laboured on the turnover. They've always done it, and yeah, it's things like that you can remember. The handbrake, oh, caught that. The handbrake, when you kind of lower it down, it's just kind of reaching in between the seat and the sill, and it's I wouldn't say awkward, but slightly awkward sort of manoeuvre. Again, it's kind of something you're familiar with. Gear change, it's nice. It's got a short throw on the gear lever. This particular car, I mean, we've bought this in recently, and it really has been lavished in terms of how it's been maintained. The guy got the gearbox rebuilt, wasn't entirely happy with it, so bought a brand new gearbox from Porsche and had it fitted. So, and that also brings another interesting point with these Porsches, is the fact that the parts are available. A lot of older cars, you can't get parts. There's pretty much nothing that you can't still buy for a Porsche, and if you want to, at a price, Porsche themselves will even supply you the parts. You know, they realise that the parts supply on the older cars is a good revenue stream, so you know it makes them very easy to own because you can get all the parts off the shelf for them, which is nice. This car is from an era where the kind of whole German engineering thing, it was almost bored at this point, I think, in that this feels a kind of heavy, solid car. You know, it's not going for the lighter, more nimble feel of modern cars. It feels solid, heavy, you know, kind of 993-esque in terms of its build quality. And when you first get in it, that weight, it feels sluggish is too harsh a word, but it hasn't got the crispness of feel of some of the newer cars, and certainly steering, you know, it does feel kind of a bit dull on the steering in that it's not sharp as such, but you've got to kind of get used to it. The engine, it's a 16 valve engine, and they tend to need driving a little bit harder anyway because they perform better sort of higher up in the rev range. So if you're too gentle with the car, again, saying it's underwhelming is not fair, because it's not an underwhelming car, but it's whatever it is, 211 horsepower, and unless you just keep it up in the revs a little bit, you don't necessarily feel all of that power. So you do have to drive it reasonably firmly to get the best out of the engine. Engine wise, as I said earlier, it feels like almost a straight 6 engine rather than a little 4-cylinder engine, or sorry, rather than a 4-cylinder engine. It's a big high capacity engine for a 4-cylinder engine. There's not much by way of engine noise. You don't get the same sort of feeling as you might get in a 911. Occasionally you'll see people fitting sports exhausts to these, and I'm not convinced it necessarily works particularly well. Whenever I've come across 944s with sports exhausts, they tend to be a bit boomy. It's not a particularly enjoyable noise in the same way you might get with the flat 6 engine. So it's, yeah, almost a sort of Grand Tourer, mini Grand Tourer maybe, rather than a kind of raspy sports car. So once you get it kind of hustled up to speed, it does just come alive once you get up in the rev range a little bit, and suddenly it sort of becomes almost lighter, slightly more nimble, and a more exciting, enjoyable car. But you do have to just drive it a little harder. So gearbox wise, it's a 5-speed box, not a 6-speed. The 968, which followed on from the 944, had a 6-speed gearbox, and that felt kind of different again with that 6-speed. You know, in 5th gear, when you're doing, well, obviously it would be illegal in this country, but if you were to maybe drive over 70 miles an hour, you know, you do feel that the engine is sort of slightly higher revving. But again, it has to, because of that 16 valve cylinder head. It needs to be, you know, you can't cruise in the same way you can in a 911 of the era, where you can just sort of potter and it pulls through from lower revs. Car's got ABS brakes, power steering, so it's kind of helping you along. It feels a modern car. If you compare this car, certainly when the 3.2 Carrera was out, if you compared this to a 3.2 Carrera, this felt a much more modern car than the equivalent 911. It was a different car. You could sense that Porsche were kind of never going to take this to the same performance level of the equivalent 911. When the 964 came out, so when the S2 was launched, the 964 was out, and then I think the two cars were on equal merit. You know, the 964, as I've said, it was that sort of first of the new, more modern 911s, and I think the 911 then competed in terms of modernity of drive on equal terms with, you know, the 944, the S2 and so on. But in the early days, with the early 944s, you know, I think the 944, as I say, it was a more modern car to drive than the equivalent 911. Well, that's taken me right back to the 1980s, early 90s, and a kind of relived a memory from, you know, when I first started buying and selling Porsches. As I say, this was a current car when I was buying and selling cars, so I'm always going to enjoy revisiting memories. I think it's hard to find 944s in this sort of condition now, so I'm being a bit spoilt with this particular car. But I think if you can find one, you know, they're a great car and still really modern in terms of how it drives on the road. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. As ever, thanks for watching the video, and for those of you that are subscribed to the YouTube channel, thank you very much. Obviously you'll find out when new videos come out. We've still got loads and loads of cars which we want to get through, and we are trying to work our way through them. It's often difficult because a car comes in, we think, oh, we'll make a video of it, and I've got to kind of sneak in and make a video before it gets sold and then goes off. So but we do try. But yeah, look after yourselves and stay safe. Enjoy using your Porsches. Have fun. I'm Henry, we're 911 Virgin. Look after yourselves. Bye bye.